My name is Sam Moats. I'm 69 years old. I was born and raised in Cleveland, Ohio, and where I went to school and graduated from up there. And then my family, my father was from Moatstown here. My mother was from Entry Mountain. Uh, and my father left this area because of work. So he went up to Cleveland, Ohio, got a job at General Motors, and that's where he stayed till he retired. But when I graduated high school, I came back down here because this was always home. Even though I wasn't born here, this was always home for me and my brothers and, well, our family. And so we always came to Moatstown. I always figured a way to get here during the summers, and we came all the vacations. So my deal was I come here for every vacation. All right. When I graduated high school, I had a choice. I could live in Cleveland, make good money, and vacation here, or I could live here where I'd always be on vacation, and then I could go up to the city and feel sorry for people. Well, the reason I wanted to come here because it was a feeling of belonging, a feeling of togetherness. I had a lot of cousins here. When I moved back, this area was really large. At one time, a school bus would come and they would have to fill up the whole one of those large school bus with the kids just to take them to school. And so I always enjoyed my summers here, and I enjoyed all my time here, and all my brothers did too. And so, and my grandmother was living when I came back. Her name was Clarice Moats. We'd lost my grandfather several years before that, but so it was all. She was like the leader of the family, I guess the matriarch or whatever. She said something, pretty much everybody just, that's what it was. And very she was a school teacher. She taught up here at the one room schoolhouse. She was from Fincastle, Virginia, and she used, and we sit and talk, and she used to tell me how being from Fincastle, Virginia, they would ride a train, and once they got to the West Virginia border, they would be told they could go sit wherever they want to sit. Going back home, when they got to the Virginia border, she was told, you have to go back to the back of the car. And that was just, her life back then. And so she came here, and of course met my grandfather, and then they developed and had 10 kids, and my dad was the oldest, is Albert Lawrence Moats. And so my mom, being from Entry Mountain, her father's name was Emory Willis. And Emory served in the military. I think it was back in the maybe World War I. And he came back home and, of course, married my grandmother. She was from Berrysville, Virginia. And she came here as a school teacher also. And one day he got killed. He was on a road with horses. My grandfather was a cavalryman. And so they said he had about 4 horses that he was taking to somebody. And they felt that it was a sort of a secluded part of Franklin. The road is still there. And apparently they said that he fell off the horse, or he got killed. He was murdered. And there was no, this would have been about like 1927 or 1929, right around through that area. So, it's really, they didn't have all the stuff they got now. And so the police ruled it as an accident, that he fell off and broke his neck. And some of the folks, even in Franklin, when they found out who my grandfather was on that side, would tell me, no, it was an accident, they killed him. And so, but that was then. That was back in 1927, 1929. This is 2025. So we're looking at roughly almost 100 years ago. And those people that did all that, they're no longer here. They're dead. It's 100 years ago. So, you can't go through hating somebody that's not even here no more. So you just take what people give you. And that's what I liked about here is if people didn't like you, you sort of knew it. Whereas in a city, you came across people that would, you know, the old story, they smiling in your face and all the time, take your place, backstabbers. That was an old song. Well, that was real. That was a city thing. Well, in the country, if they was prejudiced, they was prejudiced. But that you knew it. In the city, they're prejudiced. But you don't know it because they're smiling, because they're always in your face. And then until you need them, and then boom, then you know where you're at. Here, you always knew where you was at. You know, and I liked it. I liked the people in Franklin around. It was just, it was a different, you know. I told him one time, I said, my graduating class, we probably lost, in Cleveland, we probably lost 4 or 5 people in my graduating class. You know, one was murdered, another one was run over. And that was a norm. I mean, that wasn't something that was odd. That was a norm. Here, if they can avoid a car accident, they can go through school and graduate. There are kids here that started in kindergarten and graduated high school just back in June. 12 years in school together. And it's a community that's real tight. Even though they have their problems, they're still tight, and I like that. So that's why I stayed, and that's why I'm here.
What do you know about the history of?
Well, I play around with a lot of stuff. I'm not by no way, shape, or form a great guy on computers, but I was playing around with computers, and of course, Moats originally was spelled, of course, M-O-T-Z, and so then over the years, the census, it went from M-O-T-Z to M-O-A-T-Z, and then final spelling was M-O-A-T-S. And so what I found was Johannes Moats, they bought their passage to the United States on a ship called the Scott. And this captain on the ship, on the Scott, he was in trouble with the Queen. And so he took the money they paid for their passage, and he gave it to the Queen, from what the understanding was. And when he got to the United States, he sold the whole crew, he sold into slavery to Lieutenant Colonel Spotswood, and over in Virginia. And they said it took several years for them to prove that they was free people coming to this country. And I always hear people talk about indentured servants, and that's not real. Some of it is, but if you're a slave, you're a slave. You know, if you was Irish and you was a slave and you escaped, they would do something to stop everybody else from leaving, and it was really terrible. And so I have no proof of this, but I feel that's where Moats became black, was from that plantation. And so then the way we got here, well, one of the first pioneers for this area, I think his name was George Moats. He ended up dying in Harrisville, West Virginia. And they had the plaque, one of the first pioneers. He came here and then went on. And Moats was like Smith or Jones. It was a bunch of them. And so they ended up coming over here. They always called him Old Man because there's a couple Harmons. They always called him Old Man Harmon. I think he must have got here, and I think it was 1729. I'd have to look it up again. And then he ended up buying Moatstown, what we call Moatstown. I think that was from Ben Heiner. That was a very wealthy person at the time. And the Queen, it was just what they did back in them days. And we wasn't even a country then. We were still part of England. And so that's how I felt that that's the way I view that we got here. And then, of course, more blacks came, and more Moatses came. Some Moatses, you look, you'll see a tint or tan or complexion. Some of them, you'll see Native American features. And then if you see some of them, they don't have no resemblance of being black at all, but they're black. And I was talking to a guy, he passed on, from Richmond one time when we was talking about this, and he says, well, you know, Indians could not own land back in those days. He says, so if he was an Indian, and he says, Sam, and they looked like you, why wouldn't it be to their benefit to become a Moats so they can be a part of a community? And I said, that makes sense. I says, but there's never going to be any paperwork to prove it. And
Do you know if any people have ever gotten DNA tests done? Or
yeah, several guys. I've even thought about it, gotten DNA tests. We've had people that come back here because, see, the Moatses on that ship, the Scott, it wasn't supposed to come to where Lieutenant Colonel Spotswood was. It was supposed to go to Pennsylvania. And in Pennsylvania, there was other Moatses waiting on. And it wasn't just Moatses, it was Smiths, it was Taylor. They have a whole manifesto of everybody that was on that ship. And that's where they were supposed to have been going, was Pennsylvania. But instead they got turned into Virginia. Well, he took them to Virginia so he could sell them into slavery, and that's what he did. And then if you really want to look it up, you can look it up at the second colony. And I think it's up Virginia. And look up Lieutenant Colonel Spotswood, the second colony, and then you'll see sort of what I'm telling you about.
did any of the Moats own slaves?
Not that I know of. Not that I know of. Now, see, on my mother's side, they was John Hopkins was slave owners, and that's where my mom's family, on her dad's side, they was Douglases. And see, then the way they became Ed Willis moved into the area, and he married Lorena Willis, and that's how Lorena Douglas. That's how the Willis got started.
Around what time was that?
That had to have been right a little bit after slavery. Yeah, because see, he had children by Douglas, and he had children by some white folks too. And I remember meeting a lady once, and she asked me what my name. I told her my name, and I told her, and she says, "Did I know any Willises?" I said, "Yeah, my mom was a Willis." She said, "What was your mom?" And I said, "Lorena Moats." She says, "Was Aunt Reen her mother?" I said, "No, that was her grandma, Grandma Reen." And she says, "Okay." She says, "My mom was a half sister to her. Of course, she was white." And she says, "That doctor, he's Thompson, not Thompson, Hopkins." She said he liked women. And she said, so he's fathered women all over. So I said, no, that's something to know about. But that's where the Willis part came in. And of course, I don't know a whole lot about my grandmother's people from Fincastle. They still have a reunion down there. I think that's the 1st of July. And then my grandmother that came from Berrysville, she sold off her family's property down there because she was about the only one left. And then, but see, my grandmother remarried a Walker, and she ended up in Petersburg as a school teacher again. And so then we had, my mom had, I think it was 4 half brothers and sisters, along with Emory, her brother Emory Willis, that was from my grandfather.
Did you know much about Emory?
I knew about my uncle Emory, okay, because now see, when my grandfather got killed, I guess my mom was only about 2 or 3, and my uncle Emory, he was, I think, maybe 1 or something like that. And they said that, well, my grandmother told me this, my grandmother Catherine, that they basically brought the body up and put it on the porch for them to do with what they needed to do with. And then went away, and then after everything was done and my grandfather was buried, then my grandmother went back to Berrysville for a while, and then she ended up in Petersburg, West Virginia, school teacher. and that's where she ended up staying. And then she married Emmett Walker, and I go down and visit the grave maybe once or twice a month. Just I don't know why, I just do it. You know, it ain't like they can talk or anything, but just my way of, that they're showing that they're being remembered.
Did your family go to church? Was that important?
Oh yeah, in Cleveland we went to Hass's Chapel AME Church. That's African Methodist Episcopal Church, and my father was very, very active in the church, and my mom too. And so then, like I said, when I graduated high school, I moved back here, and then of course Most Chapel at that time was African Methodist Episcopal Church, and so you know we went down there, and you know it was just the thing that on Sunday you went to church. When I was in Cleveland, it was understood. We used to laugh. My brother graduated school in Cleveland, I think it was 1966. So my dad being from back here, my mom wasn't sure if he understood about the prom and the after prom and the whole 9 yards. And so my brother, he went to the after prom. And then, of course, that went all night long. So Sunday school was at 9:30, and at 9:30 my brother was standing at the door waiting for my dad, so he opened the door so he could go in for Sunday school. So church was very, very important.
Okay. And so you went to school in Cleveland.
Mm-hmm.
So so you never went to school here.
No, I visited but never went here.
Okay.
I was always amazed at their school back here because they made them learn. That's the big difference I saw from school I went to in Cleveland. You know, you learned, but back here it's sort of more important to learn. They just the teachers was really dedicated.
Are there any stories that you remember hearing about the school or about the dedication?
Well, no, just that if you screw up, if you're a student and you screw up, there's a good chance that the teacher's going to see your mom or your dad at the grocery store that evening, and of course she's going to tell your parents what you did in school that day. Well, in Cleveland, you never seen your teacher other than when you was in school. You know, he's just a great big city, so they never ran into you.
Right.
So it's just different. It was just one was like a city, and this was more like a close knit community.
Mm-hmm. When you came here, what were the race relations like?
I sort of got along with a lot of people, and there was some racial overtones, but all in all, I guess I felt safer in a community where there was some racists than I did in Cleveland, in a community where there's not supposed to be any racists. You know, in an extremely northern city, and I'm down here. I would say I felt safer here. I was elected to the Democratic Executive Board for here, and you know I'm black. We're maybe 2%, so that meant somebody white had to vote for me. So and then they did. I got in there. I was also a governor of the local Moose, and again. The Moose has a lot of white folks, and so if they wanted me to be their governor, that meant some white folks had to push me forward to get me there. So yeah, there's racial problems, but that's everywhere. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, we got racial problems in the White House right now, but you can either cry about it or get upset about it, or you can get mad about it, or you can just pursue your own path. Mm-hmm. And just let it go where it goes. This place has always been special to me, because like I said, you know, right across. Now this is sort of the hard part for me, because right across the road is my family cemetery, and so you got my parents buried there, my grandparents, my great grandparents, my uncles, my aunts, my cousins, and so basically, I used to say. The Moatstown that I grew up loving is right across the road here. And So it's there. And to me, some days that's hard to look out the kitchen and you're looking at your parents' gravestone. But then again, it's also a feeling owning it. Because see, that's our graveyard. You know, nobody can say who can and who can't be buried in there, except for us.
Do you plan on being buried there?
No, I would rather be cremated.
Okay.
And I would rather them take my ashes and throw it in the graveyard. But I don't want to bury my ashes. I just want to be set free.
I hear that.
Yep. My grandfather's name was Albert Samuel Moats. Of course, I'm Samuel Leon Moats. So I got part of my name from my grandfather. And of course, I guess it was his father, was Harmon Samuel Moats. So just come down like that. But he used to actually walk, and he would go to a logging camp, and he was what, if I would say a teamster, first thing you think he's talking about a truck driver. But he was actually a teamster. He would take teams of horses and train them how to log out of the mountain. And they said he was extremely good at his job, that he could take horses, and after a little while, you didn't have to walk behind them. You could just hook to the logs and they would go to the landing. You would unhook and then they'd go back up to him. And that was his main job. He was a farmer, of course, Moatstown. And he did a lot of, he was well liked in the community. And I know one of the guys that came here for homecoming one time, he said, you know, your granddad was probably the first one that ever went out and worked from up here. He said everybody else did day jobs, whatever kind of job they could find. He said, but your grandfather the first one that left out of here as a logger. And so that's what he did. And he didn't mind if he had to fighting, and he didn't care about who he was. If he had to fight you, they tell me he was very strong, and he had a reputation of that. And I guess it's maybe just because of working out in the woods all the time. You know, he just got strong, and I used to enjoy him. He was fun. You know, he might fuss and cuss, but nobody could mess with his grandchildren. They was tight to him. And so he was a good man. See, he passed, I think it was 1970. I was born in 56, so I was about 14 when he passed.
Do you remember any stories he told you?
I remember a story that him and this white guy was sort of in an argument. The white guy was saying, well, I'm a man. And they said, my grandfather says some curse words, because he could curse really well. And he said some curse words and said that he's a man. And they said that there was a log. And he said that my grandfather bear hugged the log and picked it up and carried it across this dirt road and then dropped it and said, I'm a man. And he said, well, the white guy, he grabbed it and he tried to pick it up and he couldn't pick it up and said he couldn't be outdone. So he kept trying until something slipped in his back. And they said until the day he died, he had a hump on the left side of his back from where he was trying to pick up that log to prove how much of a man he was. And then another story was a guy came to me, an older guy then. I was probably in my late 20s, early 30s. And he says, hey, do you know any colored guy that used to be around here at Moats? So I named off my uncles, older cousins, and he said, nah. He said, this guy was Albert. I said, Albert, that was my grandfather. He said, so you're Albert's grandson? I said, yes, sir. He said, I'm going to tell you this story. He says, your grandfather logged with teams of horses. And he says, my father had bought this team of horses, extremely expensive. And your grandfather took them up in the woods to train them. And he said, we heard this whipping and this cursing going on. And he said, my father told me, you go up in the woods and see what's going on. I'm not going to let Albert kill those horses. And he says, so I get to the woods And he says, I look out and I see Albert. He's taking a whip and he's whipping this log and he's hitting the horse in the butt with his hat. And he said he stood there and watched us. He said about a half hour. And he said, so finally he stepped out of the woods and said, Albert, what are you doing? Why are you beating those horses with your hat and you're hitting the log with your whip? And he says, you know, your grandfather could curse. He said, he said, you little dumb SOB. He says, you don't mistreat dumb animals. He says, if you hit the horse with your hat and they hear the whip, they think they're being beat with the whip and they'll go. And that way you don't harm them. So he said he comes down and tells his daddy that. And he says his daddy just stood there and looked at him. And he says, you don't bother Albert no more. Just leave him alone. And he said, I'll never forget that. And he says, at that time, he said, I'm 80 years old and I still remember that just like it was yesterday. And he said, he was the only colored guy on our crew. He said, but my dad dearly loved him. And so I said, well, I'm glad to, I said, I will never forget that story. Well, then the last story I've heard of Albert was he was in a group, you know, the logging team, and he was staying in the guy that owned and ran the team's house. And they said that the workers come together and told the guy, says, we don't understand why you let the colored guy live in your house and all of us got to live out here in these logger cabins. So the guy looked at him and says, all of you at one time or another stayed in my house. He said, Albert's the only one that gets up, makes a fire. When my wife gets up, the fire is ready. She can come right down and make breakfast for you. And he says, Albert is welcome in my house at all times. And I said, oh, cool. Yeah, so that's my grandfather. See, my both of them were just great people. My grandmother, you know, she was fantastic. Like I say, she was a school teacher, so she knew about everybody up. Well, she knew everybody up here. Clarice Moats was my grandmother, also known as Cluck or Emma. We called her Grandma Cluck. I don't know why, but that's just what we did. Everybody up here called her Cluck. She was just a great lady, and she supported everybody. I remember shortly after I got a driver's license, she had an old car that my grandfather had bought before he died, and I think I must have been about 16. She says, "All right, Sam, can you drive that car?" I said, "Yes, ma'am." She says, "All right, it's time to go to town. We need to go down Sandy Ridge today." Well, we stopped at probably 8 or 9 houses going down Sandy Ridge where she would go in and talk to these people that was close to her age. And then the next week we would go toward Monterey, Virginia, and she would stop at houses all the way going up toward Monterey to visit people that she knew. And then she would go to Entry Mountain, and she'd say, "All right, you let me off here, and you pick me up the road over to the Willis." And she'd look at her watch, 2.5 hours. And I'd say, "Okay." And she would visit every house on Entry Mountain until she got to the end. And that's just the type of person she was. I don't know of anybody that didn't love the lady. I mean, black or white. Teachers, ex-principals used to talk about her, how great she was. And she was just, I mean, she didn't play though. Because she taught everything from the 1st grade to the 8th grade. And a lot of her students ended up going to the Golden Horseshoe Awards that's down in Charleston for, economic excellence, I guess they called it. And there was a lot of them from her school that went. And she was just and she would take, everybody was welcomed in her house. It was just understood. If you got here and it was time to eat, she expected you to sit down at the table and break bread with her. And, you know, that's just her mindset. She's a great lady.
Where was her house at?
Right here. See, the original house was here, burnt down. And then they built this house next. And see, the house next door here is the house that my dad built, Albert Lawrence Moats, before he left here and went to Cleveland to work at General Motors. And so when my father retired, he came back and he bought this. And so my mom and, of course, my dad lived here. And then when my mom passed, then I was the only one in West Virginia between my three brothers, so she wanted me to take the house over. And so then we made arrangements that, you know, my brother has this house that my dad built. And at the time I had another house over here that I had was buying. And my other brother, I gave that to my other brother. So that, you know, 3 brothers, 3 houses. So each one had a place to bring their family back if they wanted to. And that's homecoming. Each person has, right now, the house down here is my brother and his family. Over there is my other brother and his family. And grandkids.
What's your brother's name that lives down there?
See, his name is Alan Seifela. He lives over, you go down the road and then make a left. And it's up, it used to be a Harper house. And he bought that, well, not bought it. I gave that to him. Basically what it was is that it was 3 of us, and I didn't feel comfortable just getting this. And so my thoughts is that I had this house next door and that one over there. And I had, like I say, 2 brothers. So each one picked one. And that's,
Okay.
and see, so instead of taking this, cutting it up in 3 ways, and me trying to scrape up money 2/3 to pay them all, we just did it this way. I started this thing called Moatstown, West Virginia. It's a page on Facebook. Okay, I did that because my daughter was in San Diego, California, and a lady came in and was talking to her. And so one day the lady asked her, she says, "You have a little country, a little twang or something in your?" And she said, "Yes." She says, I'm from West Virginia." She says, "Where at in West Virginia?" She says, "Oh, a little place called Moatstown." She says, "Who are you?" And she says, "Huh?" And she says, "Jennifer." And she says, No. Who is your parents?" And she says, "Sam and Tish Moats." "Sam." She said, "Who's your grandfather?" She says, "Lawrence Moats." She says, "I'm from Moatstown." She says, "My father is Arthur Moats." And so my daughter called me. She said, "Do you know Arthur Moats?" I said, "Yeah, he's a truck driver. He used to be a truck driver." I said, "Miss Dane up the road here used to live up here years ago. That's his mom. I mean, her son." And she said, "Well, she just come into the store and we started talking, and come to find out we're like distant cousins." And I said, "Yeah." So then that's when I came up with this Moatstown, West Virginia page. And so if you ever look on there, you'll see pictures of my grandfather and grandmother together when they was probably in their 20s. You'll see pictures of Reverend Boyd. He had 23 kids. And you'll see pictures of him and his wife. And you'll see pictures of kids, because everybody has put pictures on there. Collie Moats, you know, it just, but the real reason was so that people could find out where people, because what I was finding out is our Moatses are so many, and we're all over the place, and some people are living in the same towns or same cities, not realizing they have a distant cousin living right there with them. We had one guy that started talking and sending stuff, and come to find out he was a cousin of Arthur Moats, and they was in Hawaii. He had been in the military, and that's where he was, and he happened to see this Moatstown, West Virginia, or somebody told him about it, and so he jumped on it. And right now I'm sort of like the administrator, and I've been working really hard not to just open it up for everybody that wanted to be on there. I've been trying to do it so that you had to have some kind of hookup with Moatstown.
To get on there.
Mm-hmm.